Coming up, I want to examine the state of the race less than a week before Election Day, an important ruling by the Supreme Court on taking non-citizens off the voter rolls. And journalist David Daleiden joins me. We're going to talk about how Kamala Harris cracked down on him for exposing the disgusting and unethical practices of Planned Parenthood. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
I want to cover three important items in the news in this opening segment. I want to start with some news that seems to be pretty encouraging on the survey front. And now, I tell you this not to become complacent, not to feel that this election is in the bag, not at all. It's a very close election. But there are a number of indications that things are breaking our way, and I just want you to know what they are. Here's the latest from the betting site Polymarket about the betting odds on each of the swing states. They cover 6 swing states, and I'm just going to give you the odds. In Arizona, Trump 75%, Harris 25%. This means that there are $3 betting on Trump for every $1 betting on Harris. That's the meaning of this 75-25. Georgia, 73% Trump, Harris 27%. Pennsylvania is the one interesting to me. 61% Trump, 39% Harris. Wisconsin, 59% Trump, 41% Harris. Michigan, 53% Trump, 47% Harris. Actually, that's the closest of all these states. Nevada, Trump 65%, Harris 35%. Now, I want to be clear. No one is saying that when I say Arizona, Trump 75%, Harris 25%, this does not mean Trump is going to win Arizona by 75% of the vote. It just means that 75% of the betting dollars are on Trump as opposed to Harris. But now I turn to the pollster for CNN. His name is Harry Enton, and he's talking about what he thinks is going to happen. And he says, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but he goes, I'll give you a couple of indicators, and he focuses really on 2. One of them is he says that the approval rating of the incumbent party, the number of people who think the United States is on the right track right now, is 28%. And he says if you look at previous elections, when the incumbent party loses, he goes, they generally have an approval rating of about 25%. He says for the incumbent party to win an election, they generally have to be around 42%. And then he looks at a number of examples of this. And he also looks at what happens when you have unpopular presidents who are trying to be succeeded by a successor of their own party. He looks, for example, at Harry Truman, who was very unpopular in 1952. And even though he was not the candidate against Eisenhower, the actual candidate lost to Eisenhower decisively. The Republicans won the 1952 election, and Eisenhower was in for 8 years. Lyndon Johnson, very unpopular in 1968, decided not to run again. Hubert Humphrey was the candidate, destroyed by Richard M. Nixon. So what he's getting at here is that, and he gives the example of George W. Bush. George W. Bush, very unpopular in 2008. His popularity was really in the 20s. And basically McCain had no chance against Barack Obama in the 2008 election. And then he says Biden is hugely unpopular now. His popularity is in the 20s. And so Harry Enton says, well, what's the chance that the Democrats can overcome the weight of history? Now, hey, there are ways to overcome the weight of history. One of them is called stuffing the ballot box. So there is there are always risks to be aware of. But these are some encouraging signs I want you to know about. Our side is prone in general to despondency and demoralization. I don't think it's bad for us to have a sense of momentum and a certain degree of optimism as we go into the final week of the election. Item number 2. Joe Biden has called the Trump supporters, you and me, garbage. Now let's remember that this is the exact same phrase that was used to describe Puerto Rico. It's a floating island of garbage. But here's the difference. The guy who said that was a comedian trying to make a joke. He was one of like 25 speakers on the podium for the Trump rally at Madison Square Garden. I think he was there to warm up the audience with some good jokes, and he did have some good ones. That was not a particularly good one. In fact, you can tell by looking at the audience that the audience is kind of like, huh? You know, when sometimes we all go to listen to a comedian and certain things just fall flat. This one actually fell flat. But somehow the Democrats, and you know, this is just so pathetic. I mean, everybody from Bill Kristol to the Democrat pundit acting like this is a defining moment of the 2024 election. This is it right here. This is going to turn things around for Kamala Harris. And then Joe Biden comes along and goes, I think the Trump supporters are the real garbage around here. I mean, this was great. And I say great because it's so Biden. Now, when I say it's so Biden, there are kind of two ways to think about this. One way to think about this, well, let me first actually just quote Biden because there's some effort to deny that Biden said what he said. And in fact, the White House even is fake editing the transcript to slightly change the meaning of it. Here's what Biden says. I'm just quoting him. He says, just the other day, a speaker at his rally, Trump's rally, called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. That's what Biden is saying. What the White House does is they take the word supporters, which is plural, is his supporters, and they put an apostrophe, his supporter, apostrophe S, as if Joe Biden was just referring to one guy at the rally, and that guy's garbage. No, he was actually talking about the Trump supporters. Now, as I say, there's a couple of ways to interpret Biden. One is the guy simply lost his mind. He has no idea that he's actually, just blurting out things and has become a massive embarrassment to the Kamala Harris campaign. But here's my own take on it. I'm quoting from my quote tweet of this morning. Could this be a sly attempt by Biden to motivate Trump supporters and put the final nail in the coffin of the Harris campaign? Could it be that Biden is like, you know what? This Indian hooker pushed me out of there. He's like, how can he say that? No, I'm not saying it. I'm quoting Biden's potential way of thinking. Biden could be saying in his mind, gee, this Kamala Harris, pushed me out and I need to teach her a lesson. Well, in the final week of the campaign, I'm just going to take this garbage theme, which the Democrats thought that they could run with, and I'm going to turn it on them. Now, in some ways, and here's a very interesting post by a guy named Real Theo Wold. I just want to read it because he's taking this kind of seriously. He goes, look, Biden calling half the country garbage, he goes, is not a surprise. He goes, of course, the ruling elite, they think you're garbage. He goes, they poison your food, they tear down your statues and memorials to your ancestors, they let rioters burn your businesses, they send foreign murderers, thieves, rapists, and thugs into your neighborhoods. They take your livelihood and then they mock you when you plead for work. They teach your children to hate you and your country. So he says, calling us garbage? Hey, that's the first true thing that they've called us in a long time. That does reflect their point of view. And then he says, and this is a pretty good punchline, now vote accordingly. So what he's saying is, if you want to protect your way of life, you need to get out to the ballot box. Don't let anything deter you from full participation in doing that. Now, let me turn to item number 3, and that is some good news on the Supreme Court front. As you know, or you probably know, the state of Virginia undertook an effort to remove a whole bunch of non-voters, illegals, non-citizens from their voting rolls. And how these non-citizens got on the voting rolls is a good question. But they were using forms filled out by these non-citizens themselves at the Motor Vehicles Department saying, I'm not a citizen, and used that to just remove them from the voter rolls. Guess what? The Democrats went to court to stop it. And incredibly, a judge agreed with them. Not that the judge said that non-citizens should be on the rolls. The judge basically said, we cannot touch the voting rolls so close to the election. So basically, the judge had devised a procedural objection. Like, we might have to take these people off, but it's going to have to be after the election. So you see what's going on here. A leftist judge is trying to pave the way. And you wouldn't put it that way. He'd been very sly about it. But nevertheless, the idea is let's keep them on the rolls for now. Well, the Supreme Court says not so fast. The Supreme Court stays this judge's ruling, which means that Governor Glenn Youngkin, and by the way, some credit goes to the Attorney General, Jason Miyares. These are guys who immediately made an emergency petition to the court. The court has acted very promptly, and this is a rare case. I mean, we remember back to 2020 and how people would plead with the court to get involved, but the court was basically saying, sorry, it's too late, it's a fait accompli, and the court showed a great reluctance to get involved. Well, now we're seeing more vigilance on the part of citizens, more vigilance on the part of elected officials, and also more prompt action from the Supreme Court. And this may be just one indicator, but to me, it is an optimistic indicator going into next Tuesday. The radical left is working overtime to gain control of the Supreme Court. They want to end lifetime tenure so they can end the court's conservative majority. Remember when Hugo Chavez reformed Venezuela's Supreme Court? Debbie and I have had this discussion many times. She's warned me about how Chavez destroyed Venezuela by destroying the independence of the court. He never lost a ruling. He never lost an election. Packing the court ensured that Venezuela would never be a free or capitalist country again. Now, more than a decade after his death, Venezuela is still in tyranny and chaos. We can't let this happen here. If we lose the court, we lose the country. That's why my friends at First Liberty are fighting to save the court. To win the fight, they need 1 million patriots like you to join them. How do you do it? Learn more at supremecoup.com. That's supremecoup.com/Dinesh. NYPD officer Jonathan Dillard's tragic and shocking story made national headlines. During a traffic stop, Jonathan was shot and killed by a career criminal. His was the first line-of-duty death for the NYPD in 2 years. Throughout his 3 years of service, Jonathan made more than 70 arrests. He was awarded with excellent and meritorious police duty on several occasions. Jonathan, who was just 31 years old, leaves behind his wife, Stephanie, his 1-year-old son, Ryan, and his brothers and sisters in the NYPD family. At his funeral, Stephanie called Jonathan's death devastating and senseless. She said, "My husband died a hero, but he also lived as one." For this family, nothing will ever replace the loss of a husband and father, but thanks to the kindness of friends like you, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation was able to pay off the mortgage on the Diller family home. Help heroes like Jonathan and their families. Donate $11 a month to Tunnel to Towers. You can do it at T2T.org. That's T, the number 2, T.org. Guys, I'm really delighted to welcome to the podcast a new guest. It's David Daleiden. He is the project lead. He's the head of the Center for Medical Progress, which is an investigative organization that he founded in 2013. In fact, David has more than a decade experience in conducting investigative research in bioethical issues, but really focusing on the abortion industry. And he is the man responsible for exposing Planned Parenthood's sale of body parts from aborted fetuses, if you can believe it. By the way, his website is David Daleiden, DALEIDEN.com. Follow him on X at David Daleiden. His articles have appeared all over the place, the Weekly Standard, the Human Life Review. He's also appeared on a bunch of TV shows, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, the Eric Metaxas Show. David, I don't know if you should have Eric Metaxas listed in your resume. This is... We know, Eric. We're just making an inside joke.
Enemies of the state.
I was doing that to get my wife chuckling, and also Eric in case he sees the show. All right, David, welcome. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. Our viewers are not familiar with you, so I thought I might just begin by asking you to say a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, and how you became interested in not just investigative journalism, but this very unique brand of investigative journalism.
Sure. So thank you for having me on. Some of your viewers or listeners may remember back in 2015, and lots of things happened in 2015, right? And there's a lot of things I think from that time period that are still kind of playing themselves out today. But many of your listeners and viewers may remember from 2015 when that summer the story broke about Planned Parenthood selling aborted baby body parts. My organization, the Center for Medical Progress, which you can find our work at centerformedicalprogress.org or cmp.org. We're the organization responsible for the undercover video series that began to be released that summer, showing the top level leadership of Planned Parenthood, their top level abortion doctors, callously negotiating the harvesting and sale of late-term aborted baby body parts. These were the undercover videos where you saw Planned Parenthood's top national abortion doctors talking about using ultrasound guidance in a late-term abortion to flip the baby feet first in order to pull the baby out whole, to harvest lungs and livers and hearts and brains for sale to private for-profit biotech labs. These are the same undercover videos where you had top-level Planned Parenthood abortionists joking about how they wanted to buy a Lamborghini with the proceeds of selling aborted baby body parts. Needless to say, Planned Parenthood was not happy when this footage was released and when their top-level leaders were exposed as these ghouls selling the body parts of the babies that they kill in their taxpayer-funded mega clinics. And so very quickly after the release of the videos in the summer of 2015, Planned Parenthood ran to their powerful ally in the California Attorney General's office at that time. At that time, the Attorney General of California was Kamala Harris. They had supported her campaigns for many years. They had close ties to her, close ties between her office and their political offices, both nationally and in California. And so Kamala Harris, as Attorney General of California in late 2015, had a choice, right? She could either use her law enforcement authority to investigate the taxpayer-funded abortion factories across her state that were being exposed on undercover video for selling late-term aborted baby parts against the law, or she could do the bidding of her campaign donors at Planned Parenthood and come after the whistleblowers and the undercover reporters, myself and my colleagues at the Center for Medical Progress instead. And Kamala Harris chose the latter. She chose to investigate the whistleblowers and the investigative reporters rather than investigating the sale of baby body parts from taxpayer-funded abortion clinics in her state. By the way, our undercover reporting led to the successful prosecution of two of Planned Parenthood's baby parts companies in Southern California by local law enforcement, the Da Vinci companies that we captured on undercover footage working with Planned Parenthood in Southern California to sell baby body parts. They were shut down in a $7.8 million plea deal with the Orange County District Attorney in Southern California, where they admitted illegally selling body parts from the local Planned Parenthoods in Southern California. But Kamala Harris intervened in a very heavy-handed way, weaponizing the powers of her governmental office in order to try to protect Planned Parenthood from the fallout, in order to try to silence me and silence my organization, even going as far as in April of 2016, sending 11 armed California Department of Justice agents to do a raid on my one-bedroom apartment in Southern California to seize hundreds of hours of unreleased undercover footage to try to make sure that it could never see the light of day. That footage has finally started to surface as of this summer. And if you go to our website at centerformedicalprogress.org, what you will see is you will see more undercover video of top-level Planned Parenthood abortion doctors giggling about selling late-term aborted baby livers for $1,500 a piece, talking about ripping the legs off of a late-term baby being halfway born alive in order to try to cover up violations of the partial birth abortion law. It's absolutely brutal. This is the reality of the abortion industry in America that Kamala Harris and those like her will do everything with their government powers in order to try to protect and in order to try to cover up for. And so it's really important for people to have this information top of mind when we're thinking about abortion policy in our country and how we treat our brothers and sisters in the womb and how we treat their families who are vulnerable to the predatory taxpayer-funded abortion industry.
Wow, David, I'm almost speechless at what you just said, and I've got so many different things to ask you about it. But let me start with the videos themselves. Did you say that there is now a newly released batch of videos available on your website? I mean, it would seem very important to get this stuff out, not only because of the importance of the issue itself, but also because it sort of reveals what Kamala Harris is all about. And, you know, we're just a few days away, of course, from the election. And of course, anything we can learn now is much more valuable than something that we learn, 2 weeks from now, for example. Are you releasing these videos also on your social media? What are you doing with them?
Yes, yeah. So the liberation of the footage that Kamala Harris seized 8 years ago, this has begun as of earlier this summer. We've been doing everything we can to promote it on social media, on our website, to multiple news reporters. It's really interesting. Ever since Kamala Harris launched her persecution of myself and my team in 2016. Establishment press has really used that as their excuse to circle the wagons around Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry and basically lower the cone of silence over this entire issue. I mean, we were able to get some independent sort of right of center media to cover it. The New York Post actually broke the story with a couple of the videos in August, but other than that, didn't make the jump to Fox News. The establishment press won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Obviously, the Kamala Harris campaign refused to issue any kind of comment on the release of these videos that Kamala Harris had ordered seized at the behest of Planned Parenthood 8 years ago. I think that every news reporter should have been asking her for the past 3 months here now, Madam Vice President, did you know what was on these undercover videos when you agreed with Planned Parenthood to seize them from Daleiden and try and prevent them from ever being released? Did you know that they showed top-level abortion doctors from Planned Parenthood giggling about selling baby livers for $1,500 a piece? Did you know that they showed top-level Planned Parenthood abortionists laughing about ripping the legs off of a baby halfway delivered in order to cover up violations of the federal partial birth abortion law? I think that, I'm no strategist, right? But I think that the so-called abortion advantage that Kamala Harris is trying to lean into in this election, I think would be completely erased if she and her cronies were exposed for the supporters and the promoters of killing late-term, born alive, halfway delivered babies that they really are. I mean, they have weaponized government for the past 8 years in order to cover up for the taxpayer-funded abortion industry that is built around killing babies who are just as human as you or I or anybody watching this podcast. So I've been doing everything I can to get this information out there and to get this message out there. But it's been really surprising to me the willful blindness of the establishment press and government officials towards the atrocities that are being committed against women and children by the taxpayer-funded abortion industry.
And with regard to Kamala Harris, I mean, I remember quite vividly the footage which was all over social media about one of these Planned Parenthood officials talking about the Lamborghini in particular. It's just such a vivid image. It stays very clearly in my mind. Even if Kamala Harris didn't know when she ordered the initial move, it seems to me impossible that she would not have discovered subsequently, hey, this is what we're talking about. This is the stuff we confiscated. This is what we've got. And so don't you think it is overwhelmingly likely that she has been actively engaged in a project to suppress more of some of this information had gotten out initially, but suppress more of it from getting out. And it's only getting out now, almost a decade later.
100%. We have emails showing that 2 weeks before Kamala Harris ordered the raid on my home to seize this undercover footage, she had an in-person meeting in Southern California with multiple top-level Planned Parenthood officials in Southern California, including one of their top abortion doctors who was implicated in the undercover footage and in the local law enforcement investigation in Southern California. So I think it's very clear that Kamala Harris engaged in a cover-up and engaged in the obstruction of justice for selling baby body parts on behalf of her campaign donors at Planned Parenthood. And I don't think it's a coincidence that as soon as Kamala Harris got into the White House a couple of years ago as vice president, you started to see the weaponization of federal law enforcement to persecute peaceful pro-life advocates and demonstrators and to try to protect and cover up allegations of infanticide at third trimester abortion clinics in the nation's capital. If your viewers aren't familiar with the case of justice for the five third trimester aborted babies who were recovered from a whistleblower at a third trimester Washington, D.C. abortion clinic 2 years ago in 2022. Holly, Harriet, Phoenix, Christopher X, and Angel is what they've been named. Several of those babies, their bodies are 100% intact. They look prima facie like they were delivered alive and they were killed or left to die afterwards at that third trimester abortion clinic, the Washington Surgery Center in Washington, D.C. One of the advocates who recovered those bodies has been sentenced to federal prison by the Biden-Harris Department of Justice under a blatant weaponization of federal law against free speech. So, I don't think it's a coincidence, right, that this extreme escalation of the selective prosecution and weaponization of government at the highest levels against peaceful pro-life demonstrators, I don't think it's a coincidence that skyrocketed after Kamala Harris got into the White House. So this is part of a pattern in her career of weaponizing government on behalf of the powerful special interests of the abortion industry. And the fallout of what that means, both for our First Amendment rights in this country as American citizens, and the human fallout that it represents for the way that Kermit Gosnell style infanticide crimes are just being enabled and covered up in the taxpayer-funded abortion industry, is really devastating. And I hope that everybody keeps that in mind in the weeks and months ahead, because the abortion industry and their allies like Kamala Harris would like nothing more than for the national conversation about abortion in this country to be very abstract. How many angels can dance on the head of the pin in an IVF clinic and things like that. But in reality, what's going on is the abortion industry is funded with hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars every year across the country. Their business is based on killing big, healthy babies that even people who are casually pro-choice agree are human beings with civil rights, just like you or I. So I really think, I'm involved in this work because I think that this is the single most important issue for our civilization right now. I wish that more people saw that more clearly, and I wish that more people agreed with me about that. But my job as an investigative reporter is to gather the facts and gather the evidence and continue to report that and publicize that as long as I can.
We'll be right back with David Daleiden to talk more about his work. We are officially in that time of year where eating becomes way off balanced. Parties, holidays, family gatherings always mean more snacks, more sweets, generally indulging in all the wrong foods. And when your eating habits get off balance, well, so can you. That's why I strongly recommend this. It's Balance of Nature, fruits and veggies in a capsule. These are daily supplements. The fruit and veggie supplements are sourced from whole fruit and vegetable ingredients, all the things you may be missing, all the things you need to make up for being off balance during this eating season. Make sure you are getting more of a variety of fruit and vegetable ingredients every step of the way with Balance of Nature. Start a trend toward better health today with my special startup offer. Whether you order online or call direct, you got to use promo code America and you'll get 35% off plus free shipping and a money-back guarantee. Here's the number to call, 800-246-8751. Again, it's 800-246-8751. Or you can go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you'll get 35% off, you'll get free shipping, and you'll get a money-back guarantee. Mike Lindell has a heart of gold. Mike and MyPillow love giving back to those in need. They sent a truckload of 14,000 MyPillows to those impacted by Hurricane Helene. But even though he loves to give back, a large retail store just canceled a huge order that had already left the warehouse. So besides giving to those in need, Mike wants to pass some big savings directly on to you. For the first time ever, you can get a standard classic MyPillow for wholesale prices just $14.88. But it gets better. For a limited time, they're offering the entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen-size MyPillows, just $18.88. Upgrade to a king for just $1 more. Get the body pillows for $29.88. Multi-use MyPillows, just $9.88. Here's the number to call, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. When you use promo code Dinesh, you can take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever. And on top of that, get free shipping on orders over $75. These deals have never been offered this low before. Again, the number to call, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Use promo code Dinesh. Get the standard MyPillow for just $14.88. That's the lowest price ever. There are limited quantities at this price. And once they're gone, they're gone. I'm back with investigative journalist David Daleiden. He is the the project lead of the Center for Medical Progress. His website, daviddaleiden.com. Follow him on X at David Daleiden. David, we've seen something, I think, happening with the abortion debate in the last several years that parallels the slavery debate of a century and a half ago, namely a dramatic shift away from the issue of, slavery is a necessary evil. It's something that the British brought to America. We've had it for 150 years. We can't root it out immediately. There were some of the American founders who spoke like this and had these kinds of views. But it was completely different from the early 19th century when a pro-slavery faction emerged in the Democratic Party, basically saying slavery is a good thing. Slavery is a positive good. And it's actually not only good for the slave owner, it's also good for the slave. And that was quite new. It seems to me we've seen something almost parallel happening with the abortion debate. There was a time when there were people who were for some sort of legal abortion, but they were not for legal abortion under any circumstances. And even when they thought abortions were necessary, they were like, the Clinton slogan of safe, legal, and rare captures that idea that this is not something that we are in favor of. We might permit it, but we're not on the side of it. And yet what you're describing is something radically removed from this. And we've seen it also in protests where people talk about shouting their abortion. The Democrats seem to have gone from a pro-choice to genuinely a pro-abortion party, and your work is revealing the extremes to which that can go. Do you agree with this assessment of the change within the Democratic Party? I'd like you to comment on that, and then I want to follow up by asking you, what do you make of all these people? And there are some in the pro-life side who go, I don't know, you got Kamala Harris, you got Donald Trump, you got the Democrats, you got the Republicans. I can't side with either one of them because they're kind of both on the same side, or I refuse to choose among necessary evils because all necessary evils or even lesser evils are still evils. Talk a little bit about the change in the temperature of the debate around abortion and also how you think about the choices before us on the ballot.
Yeah, those are two very good questions. So as to your first question, I think that's a totally accurate assessment. And really, what you're seeing with the extremism of politicians like Kamala Harris and those close to her is you're seeing the Planned Parenthood abortion industry capture of a political party, basically, and that has to do with with the enormous financial and political power of the abortion industry. They've been subsidized with billions of dollars in taxpayer money for decades. At this point, they have laundered and funneled a lot of those resources, both from taxpayers and their blood money from doing their late-term abortions for decades and decades across the country. They have laundered that into their political operation in order to get their operatives like Kamala Harris into powerful positions, both within government and within partisan politics. And so they've really solidified a very sort of radicalized political war machine for themselves that way. And so I think I think you see that, and it's really unfortunate because I live in Southern California. I talk to kind of regular California people who are not necessarily activists or anything, who have sort of resigned themselves maybe culturally to be to see themselves as progressive people, or see themselves as casually pro-choice people. And they've sort of, I feel like a lot of them I've observed a lot of them to sort of make the decision to outsource their considerations about abortion policy to the so-called experts, right? To think that Planned Parenthood and the so-called mainstream medical people who are involved in this business of baby killing, that these are the experts and we'll just trust their recommendations. Kind of like, it's not a secret, I'm a Republican. I don't own guns. I don't really know much about gun policy. But I sort of trust, more people who are more sort of expert on that they kind of have a sense of what's going on. But I think a lot of those people that I'm describing in Southern California and in elsewhere, they've trusted Planned Parenthood, and they've sort of trusted what Planned Parenthood and their allied media and their allied politicians have promised them, that no actual babies will be harmed in the making of this movie, right? They trust that the idea that big actual healthy babies are not going to be killed by this big taxpayer funded abortion industrial complex that we're subscribing to. But in reality, the reality is the exact opposite, that even if you're okay with abortion for a certain number of weeks, or you think it should be limited to, before the baby has a heartbeat, or you really want like morning after pills to be available, all over the place, emergency contraceptives, stuff like that. Most people think the idea that a healthy baby who could survive outside the womb, even an early preemie, like 21 weeks, would be electively killed in the abortion industry, or that's legal. People even who are casually pro-choice are shocked and horrified by that idea, and their support for the abortion institution in our country, I think, is largely based on the fiction that is not happening. And if you can show them that they've been lied to by Planned Parenthood and establishment politicians like Kamala Harris, and that big actual healthy babies that you all agree are actual babies, they're actually being killed in the making of this political agenda for abortion, that's a bridge too far, I think, for the vast majority of people. So I think your assessment is very accurate on that. Turning to the second question, that I'm gonna try to choose my words carefully here, because I don't understand all of I look at it as gnashing of teeth and rending of garments over this so-called lesser two. How can we choose between these two different options? I don't understand it. I think the choice is very obvious, and obviously Center for Medical Progress is a 501c3. I'm speaking here just in my personal capacity as David Daleiden. CMP is there for identification purposes, but I don't think this is a hard decision at all. between the radical abortion extremism, the radical late-term baby-killing extremism, funded by taxpayers selling the body parts afterwards of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, compared to President Donald Trump, who is the most pro-life. You look at his record, he's the most pro-life president in the history of this country. He's responsible for overturning Roe versus Wade and saving potentially hundreds of thousands of lives already because of that decision. And the campaign is committing to divesting, very wisely, I think, divesting the federal government from its historic support of the abortion industry. That's exactly what needs to be done at this moment in history and at this moment in our civilization. So, I mean, I do not understand. And I mean no disrespect to the people who have been very some pro-life people who have been very committed to this issue for a long time, who care very deeply about making sure that we save as many lives as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think a lot of people who are used to being burned, right? And not just people who are pro-life, anybody who's right of center, like I think we have sort of a history of feeling like we get burned by people in power. There's a lot of concern about, kind of always looking around the corner for the next betrayal by somebody that we trusted and elected and all of that. So I understand that history exists, and I mean no disrespect to the people who have, really strong concerns and maybe really strong fears about that. But to me, in this particular instance, this summer and fall in this campaign, I don't actually understand it. I think that all you have to do is compare the records of the two candidates, and also just think, take a moment to think carefully about what progress and moving forward on abortion policy means now in the post-Roe era. And I think that the choice is obvious, that the only pro-life choice is to elect President Donald Trump and Senator Vance for the next 4 years. We absolutely need that in order to divest the federal government from the abortion industry. And if we do that, we will be able to save more lives, more families from the predations of the abortion industry faster than we could in any other way. So I think the choice is obvious, and I don't understand how anybody could. I really don't understand any hesitancy about that. So that's my take on that.
I mean, I like the way that you're framing it, not even so much in terms of strategy or philosophical disputation. You're just framing it in terms of the practicality of saving lives, right? I mean, if you think about the Roe era, and we had a number of pro-life presidents who preceded Trump, but basically they gave rhetorical support to the pro-life cause. We intend to overthrow Roe versus Wade, even though we haven't done it and we don't really know how to do it, but if we could, we would. And pro-lifers were saving lives, but they were trying to do it one life at a time, right? You stand outside a clinic, woman's going in, you yell at her, hey, you want to rethink your decision.
Hopefully not yelling, but yeah.
Oh, hopefully not yelling, but, exhortation and prayer. My point is you have to work it one by one, right? And here comes Trump. Roe versus Wade is overturned. We have pro-life laws. I mean, I'm talking to you from the state of Texas. We basically don't have any abortions in the whole state of Texas. Now, think of what that alone means in terms of actual lives saved, and think of the effort it would take to save that number of lives in a Roe era. It's almost impossible. So this is, I think what you're saying is when you measure it in the very human terms of number of lives saved, it's not a difficult choice. Essentially, you have a party that's pro-abortion. You have another party that may be flawed in various ways, but on the balance, it's certainly anti-abortion, and that's what we should keep in the forefront of our minds. This is, David, you've been a great guest. Thank you for joining me. I'd love to have you back sometime. I'm going to check out these videos and do my best to share them. Guys, check it out, daviddaleiden.com. Follow him on X at David Daleiden. David, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. Forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. Think about what you could do with all those savings, but it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it. From routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. We are ready to plunge into a discussion of fascism, of Nazism, a kind of book report on my book, The Big Lie, which is now out in paperback. And the opening quote is by a political scientist named Walter Laqueur. Although fascism seems to be dead, it could have a second coming in different forms. So what Walter Laqueur is saying is that not only are we hearing a lot of fascism talk that in many ways might be quite misleading, could be pointing in the wrong direction, misleading directions. Nevertheless, he's saying it is not out of the question that we could be dealing in our own time or some future time with a new fascism. Now, he says it could have a second coming in different forms. And this is important to realize because sometimes when the same thing shows up, it shows up in a different outfit and we don't recognize it as the same thing. It seems somewhat different to us because it uses a different language, it poses in a different guise, it appeals to different promises or social goods. But guess what? It is the same thing if you have the eyes to see it. Now, I begin the book by discussing Sigmund Freud and discussing a phenomenon that in psychology is called transference. The Freud noticed when he would talk to patients that some of his most interesting cases were people who would do really bad or destructive things, but then they would shift the blame for that onto someone else. They would do vicious behavior and they would say that, oh, my parents caused me to do that. They taught me to be this way. They made me the monster that I am, if you will. In some cases, people would even blame the psychiatrist. In other words, they would act in an aggressive or hostile or abusive way and then say to the psychiatrist, you're being hostile, you're being abusive. So Freud used the label transference to describe this phenomenon of transferring the blame for what you're doing onto somebody else. Now, transference is obviously a kind of a form of lying, right? Because you're not taking responsibility. You are taking the deed that belongs to you and you are pinning it, or as we say now, projecting it onto someone else. In some cases, transference also involves blaming the victim. In other words, you oppress somebody, and then when they say, why are you doing this to me? You say, I'm not doing it to you. You're doing it to me. You're the oppressor. And so there's an attempt again to flip the script, to transfer the blame. And this kind of transference, when you're blaming the victim, it's kind of a double form of abuse, right? Because if I do something bad and I blame somebody else, that's one form of wrongdoing. I'm blaming the wrong guy. But if I blame the very person that I'm victimizing, that is particularly egregious because I'm creating a double victim. There's the victimization and then there's the blaming of the victim on top of that. So that's why this form of lying is a big lie. It's not an ordinary lie, it's a double lie. It is a lie of great magnitude. And here we come to the kind of phrase that defines this book, The Big Lie. Now, the big lie is a term that is routinely attributed to Hitler. Yes. And a lot of people who hear the big lie, and in fact, hear Democrats and people on the left talk about the big lie, you get the impression that Hitler was, in fact, the person who took credit for big lies. In other words, perhaps the big lie is part of Nazi propaganda. The propaganda itself contained a lot of lies. And therefore, when we use the term the big lie, we are referring to the ways in which the Nazis, through their propaganda, distorted the truth. But this is actually not the genesis of the idea of the big lie. In fact, the big lie is something that Hitler himself uses the phrase. And he uses the phrase not to describe the Nazis, not to describe German propaganda at all. He accuses the Jews of being the liars. So here's Hitler. He goes, "The great masses of people more easily fall victim to the big lie than to the little one, since they themselves lie in little things, but would be ashamed of lies that were too big." So Hitler's making a point here that, and I hesitate to say this, but what I'm saying is there is an insight here. Hitler's saying that if you do small lies, it's very easy for people to catch them out. Because let's say, for example, I have something in my pocket, like, for example, a candy bar. And Debbie's like, you eating some candy? I'm like, no, not really. She's like, let me see what's in your pocket. Well, that's kind of a small lie.
You make me sound
I don't actually do these lies, but I'm just giving you a hypothetical. But I'm giving you a hypothetical that, kind of strikes close to home. So, but that would be a case where, you can check it out. What's in your pocket? Flip your pockets inside out. This is something we would say, for example, to our kids. But what Hitler's saying is that if you say a really big lie, then people don't really have the ability to check it out. It's too much of a whopper. It doesn't admit to easy empirical sort of checking. So let's take, for example, if I say that fascism is on the right and not on the left, think about it. That's not the kind of thing where you can say, oh, guess what? Let me look inside your pocket and I'll tell you the answer to that one. No, it is a startling and a large claim. It is, in fact, a big lie, but we'll come back to that. Hitler's point here is that you've got people who are big liars, but they get away with it because their lies are too big for people to easily figure it out. And what are these lies? According to Hitler, it is the lies told by the Jews about everything. And he says the Jews are capitalists. He also says at other times that the Jews are Bolsheviks. He says the Jews are impotent. And then he says the Jews are also lusting after our German women. He says the Jews are culturally inferior. And at other times he seems to suggest that they are culturally superior because he says that all they care about is world domination. So you have all these contradictory accusations against the Jews, and obviously they can't all be true. But the point I want to make is that while Hitler is telling falsehoods about the Jews, he's accusing the Jews of being the liars. So what is he engaging in? Exactly what I talked about a moment ago, transference. He is transferring the deceitfulness of the Nazis onto the Jews. He is blaming the victim. So even though Hitler is saying, we need to avoid big lies, the Jews are the ones who tell big lies, the real big liar, of course, is Hitler himself. And so we see here a classic case both of transference in the Freudian sense of that term and also of blaming the victim. And now we fast forward to the present and we realize that the big lie is back. There's a big lie in our own time. And what is that big lie? Well, to kind of put it right on the table, it is the claim by the left and by the Democrats, and we see it right going into this election campaign, that Trump is an American version of Mussolini or Hitler. Trump is a fascist. The Republican Party is the modern incarnation of the Nazi Party, or at least of Mussolini's black shirts, brown shirts, and the brown shirts and the black shirts. And this is a startling claim that is made about the right, and it's used as the justification for all the measures that the left is taking to go after Trump and go after the Republicans. Character assassination, all the lawfare, 2 assassination attempts now against Trump, all the attempts to lock up conservatives, Trumpsters, Republicans. Under normal circumstances, this would be hard to justify. This would be hard to explain. But of course, if these people are Nazis, or if they are fascists, and if they are trying to do to America what Hitler did to Germany, and if they are going to try to unleash a wave of genocide, if not Holocaust, then very extreme measures would make sense to stop that. And this is the template, this is the paradigm of the left. They are arguing that they need to be the way that they are because we are the way that we are. They are the anti-fascists and we are the fascists. In fact, right here you see the name Antifa, which comes out of anti-fascist. And the question that we're going to examine here, and this is going to be the argument of the book, is to turn the tables on these people. Show that they are the real fascists. They are the ones who use Nazi bullying and intimidation tactics. They subscribe to a pretty full-blown fascist ideology. The charges that they make against Trump and the GOP, transference. In other words, these charges are actually applicable to them. These self-styled opponents of hate are the actual practitioners of the politics of hate. And now I'm quoting, through a process of transference, leftists blame their victims for being and doing what they themselves are and do. In a sick inversion, the real fascists in American politics masquerade as the anti-fascists and accuse the real anti-fascists of being fascists.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and salemnow.com.